Right then, gorgeous ones. Welcome to day number 3 of our course here on how to have a normal relationship with food. Okay, you know the drill. If you're catching this on replay, you might want to jump forward 2 or 3 minutes because I'm just going to wait for everyone to arrive. I'm going to wait for someone to comment and then I know that it's working, and I'm just going to wait to make sure that I'm in the right place. Okay, so Louise has hopped on and Zoe's hopped on and some more of you are now arriving. So let me just have a quick check to make sure that I'm in the right group. How's everyone doing? Happy Wednesday. Obviously, if you're catching the replay, it may not be Wednesday, but it is right now. Right, I need someone to say hello to me, please, just so I know that my comments are working. Thank you, Diana. Yes, okay, awesome. I've got my tech working today. Speaking of tech, I've got no emails at the minute, so I've not been able to email any of you with reminders, with the worksheets. It's all gone wrong this week. I'm hoping to get it sorted very soon, but just in case you were wondering what's been going on, that will be the reason why. Now, the worksheet, incidentally, has got uploaded into the group about 10 minutes ago. That was my bad. I was meant to do it this afternoon and I completely forgot. It was scheduled to go out by email and the email didn't work. So there is a worksheet. If you're catching the replay, you'll probably have it anyway. If you haven't, then you may need to go and grab it when you can. Right, let's make a start because I want to get stuck into this conversation, which is, where are my notes? Here they are. Okay, so day number 3. We're going to continue with where we left off yesterday, and I'm hoping that all of you are having a few exciting moments of understanding things a bit differently and actually kind of, just really taking on board everything that I'm sharing, especially about this not being your fault, which I know for a lot of you yesterday was actually a really big revelation. So that's amazing. So today we are going to be looking at another part of the journey, another piece of the puzzle, and I'm going to start by asking a question. Who here is able to eat food even when you know you're not hungry and even when you actually know better? It's quite a big question, wasn't it? So who here is capable of just eating food even when you're like, oh, I should know better, I shouldn't really be doing this, I don't know what's going on? Who might that be? Who might that be? Raise your hand if it is, and just let me know. And hi to everyone that's saying hello to me. Christine and Zoe and Louise and Ruth and Denise and Diana. Okay, so Shelley's saying yes, that's me. Yusuf's saying the same. Louise is saying the same. Diana's saying me. Okay, it's one of my cheeky questions because I know that's probably the answer for most of you, and that's okay, because what we're going to do tonight, or today rather, we're going to actually look at why that actually happens. Because when you are in that place of, my relationship with food is not where I want it to be, and obviously we're tying this into weight loss for probably most of you, it can be very frustrating to find yourself in those behaviour patterns of, I know that I'm eating and I probably shouldn't, but I can't seem to stop. Or I can't seem to stop the urge to want to eat this right now, even though I kind of know better. And we spoke yesterday, if you remember about the sabotage loop and actually where sabotage kicks in. So really the conversation right now is going to be about emotional and impulse eating, which is really, really common in the realms of not having a normal relationship with food. And I know categorically that for most of you, you already know that you are emotional eaters and that you can be quite impulsive around food. And you've probably tried really hard with willpower and with discipline and with self-control, and it's probably not really worked out for you so far, and that's okay. Because the thing that I want to make super clear now before we continue is that emotional and impulse eating are, once again, automatic responses that are wired into your brain, and they need to have those patterns rewired. So those automatic behaviours need to be rewired in order to actually change it, because willpower isn't the solution. We can't override a lot of these automatic patterns, which we started talking about yesterday. So without further ado, let's now look at why self-sabotage as a kind of topic, or sorry, I've still got my little note. We'll get rid of the self because you are not at fault. It's not your fault. But why sabotage can often show up as emotional and impulse eating. So I want to help you understand this sabotage loop that we spoke about yesterday, or rather that's what we spoke about yesterday. And I want to now introduce why food in particular tends to become this like go-to coping mechanism for so many people. And I'm guessing that that's probably true for you as well. Because the thing is with food, and when we actually turn to food, so when we're actually eating food, it's not just about physical hunger. Okay, so most people know that logically we're meant to eat because our bodies need fuel, they need nutrients, they need energy. We eat because our body's hungry and we need to do so in order to stay alive and to make it work properly, etc. However, you and I know as well that eating isn't just about that. It's not just about hunger. It's also about comfort and escape and relief and many, many other things besides. So is that something that you know that you do? So do you eat for other reasons other than physical hunger? Yes or no? Do you eat for other reasons other than physical hunger? Yes or no? Let's have a quick show of hands. Yes or no? Yes, of course. Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, as most of you probably do at the moment. And again, that's fine because we're wanting to look at this now through a very different lens to actually help you recognize why this is happening. So going back to part one, it's not about, well, how do I stop it and how do I not do that anymore? When you can understand why you're doing it, you're going to then discover what the solution is. Okay, so all of you are saying yes, which I was expecting. So here is the definition. So what I'm talking about now, if you're eating when you're not actually hungry and you're eating for other reasons other than physical hunger, you are now emotionally eating. Now, emotional eating is a term, as a label, if you will, is something that's super common. I believe that it's not fundamentally wrong because we are humans with a lot of emotion, and sometimes we channel that emotion into food, or rather we turn to food in order to change the emotion. So emotional eating, the definition of it, or my definition of it, is when we turn to food to change how we feel. So in really simple terms, emotional eating is when we as human beings have decided that eating chocolate makes us feel better. Or whenever we're feeling a bit sad, we're going to go and reach for something out of the kitchen. So emotional eating is about wanting to change how you're feeling. It's about changing your emotional state. So on that note then, another question is I want you to think about this one. When do you personally most feel the urge to eat emotionally? So when do you most feel the urge to eat emotionally? So what's happening? What's going on? Tell me. When do you most feel the urge to eat emotionally? So Debbie, comfort. Yeah, I mean, we even talk about it, right? It's comfort eating or reaching for comfort food. So even the phrase kind of ties into the reason why we do it. Okay, so let's take a look. So for Christine, it's when you're tired. Yeah, that's a really common one. Diana, it's in the nights or after dinner. Let's have a see what else we've got. We've got happy, sad, bored in the evening. Yeah, so evening can be a really common one. Boredom can be a common one. Stress as well. Yeah, at the end of the day or every day without fail. Evening, nighttime, we've got a lot of nighttime snackers. When I'm stressed, when I'm sad, angry, frustrated. Okay, so all of those are completely valid. Oh yeah, when I'm feeling out of control, that's a really good one as well. Bored, comfort, stressed, every emotion. Okay, so let me walk through now a few common emotional triggers for eating. So when I talk about emotional triggers, as human beings, and I'm going to probably tell you something that you already are very aware of, our emotions are not static, okay? They're not kind of like this flat line. We don't go through every day with our emotional state just like, because that's not what humans are. We are very emotionally charged creatures, and by definition, we have a lot of emotional bandwidth. And that means that sometimes our emotions can be way up here and sometimes our emotions can be way down here. And if you are female and you are of a certain age like myself and perimenopause is kicking in, those emotions can be heightened even more. But I digress, we're going on to a different topic. But emotions basically are there to be going up and down, so they're not meant to be stable. However, what can happen when emotional eating is kind of part of that sort of picture for someone, it's usually because for that individual, their ability to regulate their emotion without food isn't present. And that's not a criticism, it's not a judgment, it just means that for you, you have never really learned how to make yourself feel better without turning to food. So here are some really common emotional triggers why someone might then turn to food to actually make themselves feel better. So the first one is just a whole list of emotional states. So I've got stress, exhaustion, boredom, loneliness, procrastination, fear, anxiety, worry. Anything to do with an emotion that can kind of feel uncomfortable, we then sometimes think, oh, food's the answer. And as all of you have just very wonderfully kind of shared with everybody, you are all very aware of that. Okay, so when you're feeling bored, you want to eat. When you're needing comfort, you want to eat. When you're feeling stressed, you want to eat. So any kind of emotion can actually be a trigger for someone to want to eat out of impulse and emotion, even when they know better. Meaning you're probably very aware of the fact that eating half a packet of biscuits right now is not what you should be doing, but it's almost like you can't stop it. Okay? Now, another way that sort of emotional and impulse eating can appear, or what can trigger it, is picking up what we said a day or so ago, and it's when you have fallen, I'm going to quote this now, off track. So there's very diet speak, but when you have fallen off track, and again, you're going to know what that means. So in your mind, you have that moment of, well, I might as well just carry on eating because I've already blown it. So a lot of perfection kind of wired into some of that behavior, but that can also be a trigger. So if you found yourself eating something that you felt like you weren't meant to or that you shouldn't, that can then sometimes trigger your urge to go and eat even more emotionally, because in your brain you're like, I've already fallen off track. So that's another reason. Another kind of example, which is, I mean, these are all very tied into the same, to be honest. I'm trying to separate them, but actually we could just clump them all as one. If you ever use food to take the edge off emotion, so what can happen with our emotional state, let's say that an emotion appears within you and it feels really uncomfortable. So it's some kind of emotion that has appeared for some reason and you're very aware of it and it doesn't feel very good. And your brain goes to the solution of, oh, well, just eating those biscuits will take the edge off it. Or go and have loads of those crisps because that'll just take the edge off it. So it's not that you're getting rid of, say, anxiety completely, but it's just kind of turning it down a bit. Or if you're feeling particularly tired or stressed or wound up or pissed off or frustrated, sometimes using food can take the edge off the emotion. So it doesn't completely eliminate it, but it just kind of turns it down a touch. And again, that's a really common trigger why you might find yourself in the kitchen rummaging through the drawers thinking like, oh, I need to eat something, even though I should know better. And then the final component to this, which we're going to touch on in a little bit more detail later, how many of you actually use food in this emotional capacity as a treat or a reward after a really long day? I'm going to ask that as an actual question. Let's just kind of do a quick show of hands. Do you ever need a treat or a reward after a very long day? It's like in your mind, I deserve this. I deserve this bar of chocolate. I deserve this massive packet of crisps. I deserve it. So a treat or a reward. It's really hard to say, treat or a reward. Yes, of course. So that again can be a trigger for emotional eating. So you kind of come home from a long day and in your head, so this is your intellectual part's thinking, well, I'm not hungry and I've just had my dinner and I've definitely had enough to eat, but today was really stressful, so I deserve some kind of treat now. Or I did a really great job at XYZ, so I'm going to reward myself, I'm going to treat myself. And in that capacity, a treat then tends to be food. even though you know better in the sense of, I probably don't really need this, but I'm going to have it anyway because I deserve it. I deserve it. It's a treat. And that, by the way, is a habit. So a lot of people, and maybe a lot of you that are responding, get into that habitual pattern of a hard day, I deserve a treat. I've done something awesome, I deserve a reward. So it's all about kind of deserving. Yeah, okay, so some of you are saying yes. Yes, 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 that's me, that's me. Yes, I'm like a dog. So Zoe, I hear you. Although I've started to change this with something else recently. Amazing, Shell. So Diana, not for you, that's fine. We're not dogs, we don't need to treat. We don't need a treat, LOL. But yeah, I hear you. You've been a good girl today. You can have a treat. Okay, so another question out of curiosity. What's your number one go-to food when you're emotional or when you're feeling stressed or upset or angry? So whatever some of your emotional triggers are, what tends to be your number one go-to food? What do you turn to? What do you want? What does your brain start craving? What's the kind of food that you're just unable to let go of the thought of? I know for a fact it's probably not going to be like cucumber or carrots or like, you know, hummus, fruit. I mean, it might be. You might surprise me now. You might all be completely the outliers and the exceptions. So, what's your number one go-to food when you are feeling emotional? Right, let's take a look now and see what everyone says. And I want you to all pay attention. So in no particular order, we shall read the comments. We've got Christine saying anything sweet. We've got chocolate from Louise. We've got crisps, sweets, chocolate from Michelle. Ice cream, chips from Debbie. Cookies and cakes from Shanda. Jean says sweet foods. Nettie, salt or sugar. Never a crunchy apple. Yes, I hear you. Our brain bizarrely doesn't go to that. It's like, I'm going to have a fruit salad. Zoe, chocolate, cookies, sweets. We've got chocolate, sweets, crisps, sourdough bread. Yeah, bread's quite a common one actually, Vivi. Cheese, sandwiches, crisps, sweets, carbs in general. Okay, we're getting a good feel for this, aren't we? So what tends to happen, and you've just all confirmed it, when we are needing and craving food in the emotional sense that we're talking about, 99% of the time our brain goes to what we have labelled as kind of the naughty foods or the treat foods, or from diet brain it's the so-called bad foods, junk food, unhealthy food, the food that you shouldn't really be having at all, or definitely not too much of, and there's a reason for that, which I'm going to come to in a second. So most of the time when we need food to make ourselves feel better, so emotional eating, our brains, this is a clue, right? It's a brain thing. It's not you, it's a brain thing. Our brain automatically goes, oh, what could we have right now that will make us feel good? I know, it's chocolate, it's cheese, it's bread, it's cake, it's biscuits, it's cookies, it's desserts, it's puddings, it's, yeah, all of those kind of things. So you are all very normal. So on the back of that now, there's another part of this question. So if that is your go-to food when you're emotional, what reward are you getting from it? So what do you get from it? If you're stressed and you eat sweets, what do you get from it? If you're feeling upset and you turn to junk food, what do you get from it? If you're feeling upset, annoyed, frustrated, pissed off, angry, lonely, and anxious, and you turn to chocolate cake or desserts, what do you get from it? What's the reward for you when that behaviour happens? And that's a very strange question, and you've probably never asked yourself that before, but I really want you to think about the answer. What's the reward that you get from that? Tell me, tell me, tell me. What's the reward that you get from it? I can imagine you all sat there now thinking, oh, I don't know. What do I get from eating half a packet of biscuits when I'm feeling a bit frustrated? Okay, so Louise, endorphins feel comfort, yep. Denise, a quick sugar rush, yes. So Jill, a dopamine hit, yep. Shanda, feelings of calm and comfort, yes. Zoe, there's a few seconds of this is amazing, followed by a bad feeling because I've done it again. Yeah, I hear you. So Zoe, that again is really common. It's that kind of rush of almost exhilaration of, oh my gosh, this feels so good, suddenly crashing down with guilt, shame, etc. Okay, so we've got it releases the emotion, comfort, brain numbing, soothing, satisfaction, dopamine hit and a numbing of the emotion. Yep, a momentary feeling of comfort, but it doesn't last, so then I need to binge and then I'm totally numb. Yes, I hear you. Guilt because I couldn't control the eating, comfort, calm. Okay, so they're all amazing observations, and as most of you are kind of saying, you're all saying pretty much the same thing. So it's some kind of comforting, nice thing, which is then usually followed by a bit of a crash. And the crash tends to be something like guilt, shame, frustration, etc., etc. So the reason why I asked that question, by the way, was actually on purpose, and I used the word reward very deliberately because I want to now explain to you why it feels so impossible to just stop when you're emotional eating. How many of you have ever tried that, by the way? When you've been in that sort of peak heightened emotional state and you find yourself reaching for food, you're in the kitchen, you're opening the cupboards, you're getting something to eat, and there's a part of your brain that's like, no, don't do this again, you said you weren't going to do this again, you should know better by now. But then there's another part of your brain that's just like, do it. And when you're doing the thing, and I remember this so vividly, like standing in the kitchen, just eating handfuls of cereal out of the box, and it was almost like a bit of an out-of-body experience in some ways. It sounds strange, but some of you might relate. And it's almost like I could see myself do it, but I wasn't able to stop. So I want to explain to you why it feels impossible to just stop emotional eating. Now, yes, it's a struggle to stop. It feels like my body was hijacked. Yeah, I appreciate that, Shanda, because in some ways it kind of was. So please pay attention to what I'm about to say. We're gonna delve into some more mind stuff, some more like eating psychology stuff, and some more just understandings, as we did yesterday, that this actually isn't your fault. Okay, so none of you are at fault here. None of you are actually broken. None of you are doing this to yourself, even though you've probably tried to tell yourself that's not the case for a very long time. All of this behaviour is not your fault. However, it is your responsibility to start looking at ways of changing it if you desire to. And you're all here, so I'm guessing that you desire to. So, when you are in the throes of emotional eating, it can feel really hard to just stop because it feels very automated, very automatic. It feels like it's on autopilot. It feels like it's happening to you. It feels like, as someone just mentioned there, was it Shanda, body was hijacked, like something's taken over, like all these expressions I hear on a daily basis. And I want to help you understand now why. Your brain, once again, going back to the brain thing, your brain in that moment has linked food with relief. Okay? And this is true with anyone that turns to food for emotional comfort. Your brain has linked food with relief. So every time you eat for comfort, your brain actually reinforces the pattern. So what happens with our brain through repetition, and this is actually the start of now habit. I want you to think about when you learnt to drive, when you learnt to do something new, when you were learning a language, when you were learning some kind of skill, when you were learning a musical instrument, whatever it might be, you've all got experience of learning something. And what happens is the more that we do something with repetition, our brain's really smart, and our brain starts to recognize these repeated patterns of behavior. And what our brain then starts to do is it goes, oh, hang on, I can save energy here because I know what the next thing is. So I'm going to kind of wire this in. I'm going to create a neural pathway. I'm going to create a shortcut. So over time, you don't need to think as much as what you did to start with. So I always use the example of learning to drive. Most people can drive. And you can probably all remember starting driving lessons and getting in and thinking, oh my God, there's so much to think about. There's this and there's this and there's these stick things and there's the wipers and how am I ever going to do it? Whereas now you can get in a car and drive safely to wherever you're going and you're probably not even paying much attention. Obviously you are, but you're not, if you know what I mean. And that's a prime example. So because you repeated it over and over and over again, your brain started to understand that there's definitely a pattern of repetition. It can save you conscious energy. You don't need to think too much. It's going to create the shortcuts for you. And this then becomes what's known as a habit. So a habit is a behavior that we have repeated often enough that our brain just wires into the program of what our brain does. Does that make sense to everyone? So if we now take the context of emotional eating, if you have been turning to food for years to make yourself feel better, every time you have been eating for comfort, your brain's been reinforcing the pattern. So it started to create these shortcuts, these neural pathways, so that what's now happened is you now have this programming in your head that as soon as you get triggered with an emotion, your brain kind of does the rest of it for you. It's almost like your brain goes, oh, we've been here before, feeling stressed, I know what we need, chocolate. And then you find yourself in the kitchen with the chocolate and you're kind of thinking, I shouldn't be doing this, but I can't seem to stop and I don't know what's going on, but I kind of like it, but maybe I don't. And it's because it's a brain thing. So the brain's kind of taken over in some way. And that's why people often say it's very automatic. I don't really know what I'm doing, but I kind of do. And it's really hard to stop. It's a habitual pattern. So habit by definition is something that we don't have conscious awareness of too much because it's habit. And at the same time, we can also change habits too. Interestingly, by the way, dieting doesn't address any of this. So if you've ever been in diet culture, which I know most of you probably have, if not all of you, this is why you will have found that it's been really hard to ever stick to it, because these triggers and these things that I talk about are not part of diet culture, but actually these are the core reasons why people need to address them in order to change their relationship with food. So impulse eating or emotional eating isn't therefore a failure on your part, it's actually a habit loop. And this is why I asked you, what do you actually get from these foods when you turn to them, when you're feeling not brilliant? Because the habit loop by definition, and I'm going to run through this in a really simple way just to help you understand what's actually happening. The habit loop is a sequence of events that triggers one kind of, it's like a domino. And the end result of a habit loop is there's some kind of reward. Now, granted, things like brushing our teeth, you might think, well, I don't really get any reward from brushing my teeth, but there will still be a part of you that does get something from it, or else you wouldn't do it. Because this is the other thing. When it comes to habits, especially like personal habits, so things like driving cars and speaking foreign languages, they're somewhat different, but habits that we kind of do ourselves, such as eating or drinking, people that smoke, whatever it is, there's always some kind of reward. They get some kind of benefit from it, or else otherwise the brain wouldn't continue doing it. Does that make sense to everyone? It's really, really important to understand. And this is why people like, and smoking is a classic example. I used to work as a clinical hypnotherapist many moons ago. I had a clinic in Dubai, and smoking was actually one of my biggest things that I used to work with at the time. And it was always interesting how smokers, they know consciously it's dangerous. They know consciously they're damaging their health. They know consciously there's an increased risk in this, this, and this, and yet they continue to do it. And the reason being is the habit loop, because they get something from that behavior. Even though other people might think, well, it's just ridiculous, why are you doing that? To that particular person who chooses to smoke, they're getting some benefit. There is a reward for the behavior. And emotional eating is exactly the same. And that's why it's not as simple as saying, oh, well, just stop and don't do it. Because your brain has wired in this loop of, but you get something from it. So therefore, why would we take it away? So the habit loop goes like this. There's 3 steps to it, or the simple version, there's 3 steps to it. The first one is that there's always a trigger. So a trigger in this context would be you feel stressed, or you feel bored, or you feel anxious, or you're feeling frustrated. So you notice something and it's an emotional trigger. When that trigger happens, your brain then starts to go into this autopilot of, oh, been here before, I know what to do. I know how to change this. I know how to get a reward from this particular trigger. The action is then activated, and the action is eating. So it could be chocolate, cakes, crisps, desserts, puddings, bread, cheese, doesn't really matter. But the action is the next bit that follows. And then the third part of the habit loop, which is actually the bit that closes it, is the reward. And the reward in this example is momentary relief. And all of you have said that. So in that particular moment of you feeling stressed and you reach for the ice cream, the reward is that you get momentary relief from feeling stressed. If you're feeling anxious and you reach for the chocolate, the reward from that is momentary relief. And that's what your brain has wired, because every time you repeat that habit or you repeat that behavior, which has now become a habit, your brain is constantly reinforcing the fact that this is what we do. This is what we do. When we feel stressed and we want relief, we need to go and get chocolate or ice cream. Now, does that make sense to everyone before I just continue with the next bit? And this is also, by the way, why the more that you tell yourself in that moment, I shouldn't be eating this, I shouldn't be eating this, the more powerful the urge will become, because your brain's going to challenge the thought of you shouldn't have it, because to your brain, there is a momentary relief coming, so why would we choose to stop it? If anyone has had any revelations, if we've got any light bulbs this evening, please let me know. We have a habit loop at play, which you aren't controlling, so you're not consciously going, I am stressed, I need ice cream. Your brain's kind of taken over. Now, obviously, you're still responsible for the behaviour, and I'm going to talk more about that tomorrow and Friday. But understanding the habit loop is really important, because when you can go, oh my God, that makes sense. I now understand why I kind of do that. So now what do I do to start changing it? Yeah? Is this making sense to everyone? Now, a question for maybe all of you to have a little think about off the back of that would be, so what's your reward that you're getting particularly? So if you know that whenever you do get stressed or worked up or overwhelmed or frustrated, angry, bored, lonely, whatever, and you always turn to food, what has your brain decided you're getting in terms of reward? Yes, it's momentary relief, but is it something else for you? Is it deeper than that? Is it a bit more, a bit bigger than that? Oh, Zoe's had a light bulb. Yes, yes, love a good light bulb. Oh, Nettie, that blooming brilliant. Yes, as someone who quit smoking 12 months ago after understanding why I did it, makes complete sense. Yes, I know we spoke about this, right? It's understanding why the behaviour's there and what it's actually giving you and what the benefit is of that behaviour, because once you understand why, you can then do something about it. You can make different decisions, different choices. You can then, part of your identity. Absolutely. Absolutely. See, identity's come up again today, hasn't it? It's a big part of this, to be honest. We're probably not going to go too much into identity over the next couple of days, but yes, identity is still there. Right, let me continue. So I want to teach you something that is actually really simple, because you might be listening to this now thinking, well, that's great and I get it and it makes sense, but how do I stop it? How do I stop it? Tell me what to do, Rachel. Of course, I'm going to give some suggestions. And this is one of them. It's called the food pause method. And it's, when I explain it to you, you might think, is that it? But when you put it into action, that's when you're going to get the moments of like, oh, okay. So the food pause method is as follows. If you are nodding along to this conversation and you're absolutely identifying yourself with everything that I'm saying, and you know that when you get stressed, upset, emotion, some kind of emotion, that you then go into the kitchen to eat, this is what I want to invite you to start doing out of curiosity. And it's called the food pause method. You might already have an idea what this is. Before you go and grab the thing, even if we're talking about this automated behavior, you are still consciously able to make a decision, which is something that we might explore a bit more about tomorrow. But before you go and grab the thing, before you go and shove it in your mouth, before you go and stuff it down whatever that emotion might be, I want you to take 5 seconds to just pause, and you're going to ask yourself 2 questions. The first question is, what do I really need right now? And the second question is this hunger or something else? I just had a load of balloons appear from the back. Did anyone else see that then? That was really weird. It's like, just a load of balloons appeared on the back of my background, but that wasn't me. Okay, did you catch that? So before you go and shove the food in, just by default and habit, I want you to ask these questions. 5-second pause. What do I really need right now? Number 1. And number 2 is this hunger or something else? The reason why those questions are super, super, super important is because it's about you starting to now get into the practice of interrupting the cycle. Now, what I mean by interrupting the cycle is about you starting to break this habitual pattern of emotion equals food. The intention is not for you to stop emotional eating overnight. That's not going to happen for anyone because it takes a little bit of practice and intentionality to keep breaking the cycle. But that's one of the first ways to do it. So those questions are really important because it starts to weaken the habit loop. Okay, now it could be that you ask those questions and you still want to eat afterwards, and you absolutely can do. But this pause, the 5-second pause, is only for you to go, hang on, am I hungry? Is this actually hungry? Is this hunger? Am I hungry? Or is it something else? And what do I need right now? You're going to start getting into the practice of breaking the habit loop. Now, once again, post-it notes are freaking brilliant for this. Write those questions out and stick them on your fridge. Stick them in your snack drawer. Stick them in the cupboard. Stick them in the drawer where you've got the biscuits. Put them on the freezer. Just so that you can start consciously interrupting the pattern with a bright yellow, pink, green note and go, oh, hang on a second. Right, is this hunger right now? Or is it something else? You are free to eat after if you want to. But the intention of this is to start weakening the habit loop so that eventually the brain starts to rewire a different pathway. If you start weakening the connection between stress equals chocolate or anger equals ice cream, eventually your brain will start to catch up. As it did in the first place of creating that habit loop, your brain will start to rewire a different one. Okay? Does that make sense? Yeah? Shanda, there are times when I give myself what I need after that pause, I get a relief, but the urge returns. Is that normal? Yeah, it can be, Shanda, because the emotion won't have gone anywhere. So there's a few steps to this, right? There's a few steps to how we actually break the cycle of emotional eating completely. And yes, addressing the emotion is the biggest one. If you get anxious a lot, if you get overwhelmed a lot, if you get worried a lot, if you get angry a lot, ideally, you want to learn a way of actually regulating that emotion like completely so that it doesn't floor you, it doesn't derail you, it doesn't send you into the kitchen. However, on top of that, we also do want to start practicing breaking this habit loop. So yes, it's normal that the emotion might return or the urge might return. So in that sense, you want to be focusing more on the emotion. It's like, how do I now deal with how I feel? And that's kind of going into more deeper things. But that's something to all practice, okay? That little quick food pause technique. Dory, if you can quit smoking, then you can do that. Oh, yes, that's to Nettie, wasn't it? Absolutely. You can change behaviour. Behaviour can be changed, and it's also dependent on some of your beliefs as well, right? You've got to believe that this is possible. You've got to believe that you can, that you are open to change. You've got to start shifting your identity a little bit around someone who. So someone who can take a pause before eating, someone who can navigate emotions, someone who can have control around food, someone who can find this simple, someone who can lose weight without dieting. Do you hear how I'm painting a picture for my brain to go, oh, okay, that's interesting. Interesting. Okay, so let me see if there's anything else I wanted to share about that. No, I'm kind of coming to the end of where I want to stop right now. I'm going to leave that till tomorrow because it goes into a slightly different topic. So just to recap, today We're looking at still the sabotage pattern, but how emotional eating can be part of that sabotage picture. Emotional eating is about changing how you feel. It's a brain thing once again. It's actually part of the habit loop, and the habit loop is repetition. So for whatever reason you've been turning to food, and we don't need to get blamey or judgmental now, but every time you have eaten when you've not been hungry, and it's been because you want to change how you're feeling, your brain has wired that in as a pattern. And then over a period of time, your brain has now made a direct association of stress equals chocolate, okay? Anger equals ice cream, etc., etc. The first step to start breaking the habit loop, though, is, well, there's two. It's understanding what the reward is, first of all. So what do you actually get that's beneficial from having that behaviour? And it's all about momentary relief. So it does actually make you feel a bit better, albeit temporarily, to start with, or else your brain wouldn't continue with the habit loop. And then the second thing is to start breaking and weakening that loop cycle. And an example of doing that will be those questions that I've just given you to write on a post-it note. So what do I really need right now? And is this hunger or something else? It's not about eliminating emotional eating kind of overnight whatsoever. It's simply about getting into the practice of interrupting the cycle. You're actually going to start weakening that connection just by taking a 5-second pause. If you decide to eat after, you absolutely can do, because you haven't been shown what to do completely. But sometimes those questions are often enough for you to actually make a different conscious choice. So don't be surprised if that's what you start to notice as well, okay? Right, gorgeous ones. I'm going to leave it there for now, because we're going to move on to another aspect of this tomorrow. But what is coming tomorrow, I'm going to give you a little hint. We're actually going to start tackling one of the biggest mind traps when it comes to sabotage, and it's the all or nothing thinking and the guilt that's connected to it. Because that is a really big part as to how someone gets stuck in that sabotage mode, is they're thinking very much about it's all or nothing, it's black and white, it's right or wrong. An element of perfectionism in that as well, but we're going to look at that specifically tomorrow, because as always, it's a really interesting conversation, and I hope that you can join, okay? Right, it was a pleasure as always. Watch out for workshop 4. If you're catching this on replay, you'll already be able to find it, but otherwise I shall be here same time tomorrow for another conversation. See you all then.